Today's video is going to revolve around the person of Winston Churchill, who is widely respected in most of the world as a war hero and one of the fierce defenders against Axis powers. But as always, there are those people who want to turn Churchill into the opposite of what he was. So the question is, was Winston Churchill a warmonger? No. It's just a whole bunch of invented hoax quotes falsely attributed to him in order to make him appear as someone whose main goal it was to wage war on Germany and bring about her destruction. So today we're going to be debunking hoax quotes about Winston Churchill. Specifically, quotes that make him look like a warmonger. Revisionists love trying to turn the respected Churchill into a rabid anti-German warlord. Oh, have they tried and tried. So we're going to start with the third quote in this red pill infograph, because this is a quote that I see appearing so often in the YouTube comment section and also other places. So let's read it. Germany's unforgivable crime before the Second World War was her attempt to extricate her economic power from the world's trading system and to create her own exchange mechanism, which would deny world finance its opportunity to profit. And there's a source provided to this quote. It is Churchill saying this to Lord Robert Boothby, quoted in the foreword, second edition by Sidney Rogerson, of a book called Propaganda in the Next War, published in the year 2001, original first edition published in the year 1938. Now, the average reader, upon seeing such a lengthy source attached to the quote, will find it hard to question its legitimacy. But those who do some digging will immediately find out the truth. This is a hoax quote which was invented in the year 2001 by a man named David Musa Pidcock, a convert to radical Islam who blamed the 9/11 attacks on a Jewish conspiracy to discredit Islam and undermine the West. The book Propaganda in the Next War was initially published in 1938, but there is no trace in any reputable catalog or bookshop of there ever being a second edition published. The supposed foreword to the second edition, containing the purported Churchill quote, appears only on right-wing conspiracy sites. How interesting. The Churchill Center, which holds a 13 million word digitized archive of Churchill's writings, confirmed on request back in 2006 that nothing resembling the quote is held in their files. Neo-Nazis and anti-Semites are angry with Churchill for daring to declare war on their beloved Hitler. This fake quote and the others in the above image are intended to convince people that Churchill was secretly in the pay of his Jewish overlords and took Britain to war with the Nazis purely for the benefit of world finance, Zionism, and the creation of the State of Israel, even though what's funny is that he wasn't even Prime Minister of Britain when war was declared on Germany. And interestingly, very few revisionists hate and have spun similarly extensive conspiracy theories regarding Neville Chamberlain by comparison, who was the previous Prime Minister and who declared war on Germany. Nevertheless, the goal of the revisionists is to convince the average person on the street out there that Winston Churchill did not hate Germany until sometime in the mid-1930s he almost bankrupted himself, but got bailed out by rich Jewish bankers, one of them being Bernard Baruch, who is pictured here, and that from then on he started his anti-German rhetoric. This is what the bottom of the infograph states, listing Bernard Baruch as the member of a secret group called The Focus, and as source it cites David Irving. Okay, first of all, anyone who bothers looking up this image will find out that this photo was taken as late as 1961, rather than showing a meeting between the two in the 1930s. Secondly, David Irving is not even a historian with a degree from any university, but a layman who spent his entire life trying to convince the world that his idol, Adolf Hitler, did nothing wrong, waving around any German document he could find in his archival hunts that could cement his claim, while ignoring the mountain of documents and testimony that real historians use to prove Nazi Germany's aggression. A classic combination of cherry-picking and lying by omission. Having gotten that out of the way, let's talk about this entity called the Focus, or alternatively, the Focus Group, as some biographies of Churchill put it. This itself is a good indication about this group. It doesn't even have a consistent name. The only comprehensive account that exists about the Focus is a book by a German emigrant who fled the Nazis called Eugen Spier, which is literally called Focus, a Footnote in History. And as the book's title foretells, whatever the focus was, it certainly doesn't amount to more than an actual footnote in history. Reading this account, as well as several biographies of Churchill that mention this group in passing, the Focus was far from any kind of world Jewry. What it was an informal gathering of a handful of British high society people who opposed Britain's fruitless appeasement policy towards Nazi Germany and who regularly met for lunch in order to exchange ideas. There is no evidence that Bernard Baruch was part of the Focus. But yes, Churchill and Baruch were friends, in fact, since the 1920s already. So the idea that Baruch managed to buy out Churchill sometime in the mid-1930s is nonsense. The conspiracy theory is simple. It maintains that because Bernard Baruch was a rich and influential American Jewish businessman, everyone he touched automatically became his slave and did his bidding, and that somehow Baruch wanted to destroy Germany, and ya better believe it. Right. Now let's take a look at another quote, namely the first one. And it says the following: "You must understand that this war is not against Hitler or National Socialism, but against the strength of the German people, which is to be smashed once and for all, regardless of whether it is in the hands of Hitler or a Jesuit priest." The source usually given is Emery Hughes' Winston Churchill, His Career in War and Peace, page 145. And one site gives a further source, namely, quoted as per Adrian Preisinger, von Sachsenhausen bis Buchenwald, page 23. First of all, who is Adrian Preisinger? I have no idea. Sounds like a pen name. The book Von Sachsenhausen bis Buchenwald, Todesfabriken der Kommunisten, somewhat telling in English because the translation is From Sachsenhausen to Buchenwald, Communist Death Factories. It was a book that was published in August 1997 by the Vohwinkel Verlag, the publisher Vohwinkel, which in turn is part of the Verlagsgesellschaft Berg. Even a source as commonly available to people as Wikipedia states that the latter is Germany's largest right-wing extremist publisher. But who are we to judge, right? Let's just call Preisinger a revisionist. However, Preisinger in his book is reproducing the quote he claims was originally made by Emery Hughes. Emery Hughes, however, does not sound like a revisionist at all. What you're seeing here is a thread on Kodo, which is Denier Central, where even the smarter deniers have trouble affirming its authenticity in Emery Hughes' book because the Winston Churchill, His Career in War and Peace book in question is old and somewhat hard to get. Of course, one former denier, particularly known for painstakingly hunting down primary and secondary sources, especially when it comes to quotes, is a user called the Black Rabbit of Inlay, who in that very thread proves that the quote is a fabrication by the liar Preisinger, as it does not appear in Hughes' book at all. And I quote, "It's a fake quote. The alleged quote does not appear on either page 45 nor 145 of Hughes' original 1950 edition, and it doesn't appear anywhere in the 1955 British Bulldog edition." Let's move on to the next quote. And this is a quote that is presented in discussions revolving around the bombing of Dresden in 1945, February. You see, the Dresden bombing, and today's historians agree on this, had approximately a death toll of 27,000 people. However, revisionists like to present the bombing of Dresden as the firebombing, the Holocaust of German civilians, and claim that anywhere between 100,000 to 500,000 innocent German men, women, children, and babies were partially melted into the tarmac on that day. I'm going to refute these numbers in a different video. However, the whole discussion revolving around the bombing of Dresden has been popularized by a film called Hellstorm: The Death of Nazi Germany, 1939 to 1947. And in relation to arguments on that subject, this alleged Churchill quote is presented. So let's read it. "I do not want suggestions as to how we can disable the economy and the machinery of war. What I want are suggestions as to how we can roast the German refugees on their escape from Breslau." What is the source? Not Churchill himself, but the Barnes Review, Volume 5, page 30, 1999. What is the Barnes Review? Basically denier fan fiction. So unless you can provide me with a more accurate source that links this quote to Churchill, it belongs into the trash bin. How about tackling the less shocking Crush quote, which is, "Germany is becoming too strong. We must crush her." And this is a pre-war quote to American General Robert E. Wood in November 1936. Quoted in Peter H. Nicol, Englands Krieg gegen Deutschland, page 82. I say less shocking because in the years leading up to the war, this could be understood as political rhetoric directed against the power factor of a nation-state rather than as an intent to genocide its people. Still, there is no solid evidence for this quote either, as it is based on hearsay. Keep in mind, Churchill was not even in power back in 1936. Of course, this mysterious Peter H. Nicol is probably as much of a pen name as the aforementioned Adrian Preisinger. Similarly, his book is published by the Grabert Verlag, which is another extremist publishing house, as per Wikipedia. And finally, the last quote. "I do not understand this squeamishness about the use of gas. I am strongly in favor of using poisoned gas against uncivilized tribes." Interestingly, this is the only quote that is actually genuine. It is shocking to hear Churchill talk about gassing people in such a carefree manner, but only if you stick to the truncated quote as supplied by the revisionists, who, on a different day of the week, accuse mainstream historians of truncating Hitler's speeches. Here is Churchill's quote in its full length. And it's part of something called Churchill's 1919 War Office Memorandum. You can even find this on Wikipedia. This is not something that the mainstream is trying to hide. So after reading this, you will realize that Churchill's goal was to minimize human suffering, not maximize it. And the extended quote provides context, as Churchill also vouched for the use of non-lethal gas as long as it demoralized the enemy. There's even an article that you can read here which explains this quote. And finally, to further demonize Winston Churchill, revisionists like to claim that he did nothing to alleviate the Bengal famine of 1943 using out-of-context quotes of Churchill's youth where he spoke disapprovingly of people with dark complexion as proof that he is guilty of genocide of brown people. I'd like to remind everyone that the Bengal famine was primarily caused by the Japanese occupation of Burma blocking rice shipments to India, as well as crop damage from tidal waves and fungal disease. British freighters were also being sunk in the Atlantic by German U-boats to such an extent that they could not possibly divert further resources to India without severely compromising the war effort. So yeah, I mean, Churchill, who is busy trying to fight for Britain's continued existence while being at war with fascist Europe, most of which was under Nazi control in 1943, and just 3 years earlier the Wehrmacht was busy dropping bombs on London and Coventry, somehow this Churchill killed 3 million Bengalis on the other side of the planet? Right. Well, there you go, folks. These are just some of the quotes that you will often find on the internet, complete with source. But don't let that fool you into thinking that the quotes are genuine. This debunking brought to you by Holocaust Documents. If you're interested in more stupid revisionist bullcrap that I have refuted over the past 2 years, make sure to visit my blog at imgur.com/a/725 It's a relatively simple address you can find on my YouTube channel cover photo as well. See you around.